Well, I had contacted Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who was the head of the National Security Agency in the United States, Deputy Director at CIA, Director of Naval Intelligence, and a variety of intelligence posts, a technologist, and clearly someone that if this was really accurate, that there really were UFOs and non-human intelligence around, this is a man who had to know. So I was able to contact him thanks to a contact through Admiral Lord Hill Norton here in the UK. And this conversation, he alarmingly not only indicated that these issues were covered under national secrecy laws, but that the United States government did in fact have possession of the hardware associated with this. In other words, this was an actual physical phenomenon.
A craft, a spaceship.
Several of them, and they were in operational condition.
Particular incident we were involved in, we were just under a mile and a half of water, North Atlantic. What had happened, they had picked up there's a survey vehicle working the North Atlantic that had picked up some radioactive signal. It was almost a perfect symmetric piece of metal with marking around the edge, and it was just a triangular shape, but no glass, nothing that would appear to be a hatch or a cockpit of any type.
From Roswell in 1947 to Jake Barber in 2024, on this channel we have discussed extensively UFO crash retrieval operations performed by UFO Legacy Programs involving the United States Army and Air Force. Over the past decades, these retrievals are alleged to have occurred over the continental United States, Mexico, Peru, Vietnam, the former Soviet Union, China, and numerous lands around the globe. In several U.S. incidents, rapid reaction response teams are detailed to fly in via helicopter, drive in via flatbed truck, or utilize any vehicle system to retrieve non-human craft and transport them to clandestine above and below ground military installations. But what about retrieval operations that must be conducted in the oceans of our planet? What happens when UFOs crash into water, or USOs, unidentified submerged objects, must be recovered? How are such operations conducted in the most mysterious corners of our planet where only roughly 26% of our ocean's floors have been mapped? This would of course require the most powerful seafaring military on the planet, the United States Navy, and its immeasurable special access programs, internal intelligence offices, corporate programs, and partnerships with shadowy U.S. intelligence apparatuses. But does the Navy just retrieve UFO and USOs in our water, or do they, like many retrieval instances we have covered on this channel involving the Army and Air Force, additionally engage in storage, exploitation, and reverse engineering of technologies of unknown origin? For this reason, I want to dive in and explore the modus operandi, operational history, and key players in U.S. UFO Navy legacy programs. From the research we will explore in this project, I theorize naval UFO programs can be delegated to four major components of operation: monitor, collect, store, and exploit. These operations are likely conducted out of the Office of Naval Research and Office of Naval Intelligence in conjunction with U.S. Special Forces Command, SOCOM. Shadowy intelligence organizations like the highly secretive National Underwater Reconnaissance Office and Navy Special Program, and involve U.S. naval stations like NAWC China Lake and NSWC Crane, while engaging with defense contractors and FFRDCs such as Lockheed Martin for utilization of their now retired deep submergence rescue vehicles Mystic and Avalon. This investigation will explore in tremendous detail the three components of naval UFO programs I outlined above: UFO and USO collection, NHI craft storage, and technologies of unknown origin TUO exploitation. One major cornerstone I theorize exists in naval UFO programs, Monitor, will be largely omitted from today's exploration. While the topic of possible undersea UFO bases or installations is well worth investigating in the future, I have covered the topic of USO reports twice already on this channel. These include discussion of OPNAV 3820, a naval regulation restricting maritime UFO reporting. With that being said, let us look beyond the veil to analyze Naval UFO Legacy Programs. Hey guys, it's UAP Gerb, and I am thrilled for you to join me today as we take a direct investigation into UFO legacy programs under the United States Navy. We will direct our focus on three key pillars relevant to today's discussion: collection, storage, and exploitation of non-human craft and technology. In this investigation, we will analyze the alleged structure of naval UFO programs, study key figures associated with said programs, evaluate a handful of incredibly intriguing USO retrieval cases, and identify naval installations alleged to hold non-human craft and biologics.
I've been sitting on this information for quite a while now, and I felt quite nervous about it because the retrieval program undertaken by the CIA and elements of the US Navy is probably one of the most tightly guarded secrets in the US government, and those protecting it can be quite nasty. And I was warned about that.
On 20 September 2024, excellent UK-based journalist Christopher Sharp in the Liberation Times posted an article titled, quote, "Paradigm-changing UFO transparency legislation fails in Congress for second consecutive year." The piece discussed the unfortunate dismissal of the UAP Disclosure Act in the fiscal year 2025 National Defense Authorization Act. This exclusion of the UAPDA is another topic for another day, as such bombshell legislation could very well have begun the unraveling of UAP legacy program secrecy. The September 20 article pivots rapidly, discussing multiple programs orchestrated by the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology and its Directorate of Operations, alongside Department of Defense and Department of Energy components that have for decades bypassed democratic oversight to retrieve advanced technologies of unknown origin. If this CIA DS&T sounds familiar to you, it is likely because this CIA component has been accused on myriad occasions by Chris Sharp and Dr. Eric Davis as directly participating in and obfuscating data around UFO retrievals. For example, Glenn Gaffney, former CIA DS&T director, has been labeled as the gatekeeper who ceased Lockheed Martin's attempts to divest UFO materials, likely the 1953 Kingman, Arizona crash, to the OSAT program in 2008. Additionally, former CIA DS&T Deputy Director Doug Wolf aided in founding the CIA OGA, or Office of Global Access, in 2003. Wolf and the OGA have been accused by Sharp and others as participating in retrievals outside of the United States with JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. Anyways, the 20 September Sharp article proceeds to detail some truly startling revelations. Quote, "Multiple programs are understood to be orchestrated by the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology and its Directorate of Operations, including its maritime branch, alongside components of the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office, U.S. Navy, National Reconnaissance Office, Space Command, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and Joint Special Operations Command." According to Liberation Times sources, missions carried out by these programs include the retrieval of objects from beneath the oceans, involving the CIA's Directorate of Operations, the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office, coordinated between the CIA and U.S. Navy, United States Special Operations Command, and submersibles from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. Additionally, the retrieval of objects on foreign soil is conducted with the involvement of the CIA's Office of Global Access and Joint Special Operations Command." End quote. Sharp directly named military and intelligence organizations involved with ocean-based retrieval, including two institutions almost never discussed: the NURO, National Underwater Reconnaissance Office, and WHOI, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. But before we break down these statements, I must detail the evolution of this article, as it allows us to study, in Chris Sharp's own words, information detrimental to his safety. By 22 September 2024, the article was revised, redacting all information about the Navy, NURO, Woods Hole, NGA, NRO, JSOC, etc. The new bare-bones edition still discussed the CIA, DS&T, DoD, and DOE, but all true actionable data was stripped from the piece. Sharp was accused by some Twitter users as making quote-unquote stealth edits to remove information from the article, but he responded by stating, quote, "This is sourced information. There is a real, extremely dangerous reason little information has been released about such programs. Content from the article was removed because of the threats posed to me," end quote. By 25 September 2024, 5 days after the original posting, Sharp would once again edit the article and say, quote, "Okay, so someone has recklessly put me at extreme risk, so I've updated last week's article relating to the UAPDA, reverting back to details previously mentioned. This time, the details are far more specific, so here it is, the alleged undersea retrieval program," end quote. This third edit is quite similar to the first piece, but expands on multiple departments and agencies named specialized assets and expertise to carry out undersea craft retrievals. In this latest iteration, Sharp states for operations, Woods Hole provided deep submergence vehicles to, quote, "support retrieval efforts," end quote. Deep Submerged Rescue Vehicles, or DSRV, will be a crucial aspect of a USO retrieval operation covered much later on in this project. The third iteration does powerfully claim the undersea craft are, quote, "transferred to the Office of Naval Research, which subsequently hands them over to defense contractors for detailed analysis," end quote. From this article, we can extract a powerful thesis. The US Navy works in conjunction with the CIA, DS&T, alongside JSOC or SOCOM forces, intelligence agencies such as the NRO, NGA, and shadowy NURO, as well as defense RDT&E facilities and private contractors to retrieve and store non-human craft found deep undersea. But let's really break this down, analyzing the targeted role of the CIA's Office of Global Access alongside JSOC in global soil-based crash retrievals. We can assume a similar structure for undersea retrievals where the CIA DS&T serves as the logistics coordinator while JSOC provides men-at-arms, industrial security, human intelligence, etc. In this apparatus, the NRO and NGA would harness reconnaissance satellites to provide SIGINT, or signals intelligence, to retrieval teams, while the shadowy National Underwater Reconnaissance Office provides unknown methods of underwater reconnaissance. In such a system outlined by Sharp, retrieval operations would be done in tandem with the US Navy and contractors such as Lockheed Martin and their DSRV and dry submersible, as well as non-profit research facilities such as Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and their many deep submergence vehicles. Finally, in this hypothesized naval UFO program, craft would be taken to various Office of Naval Research locations before being transferred to defense contractors to study. But in this program, I do think Sharp is missing a key step here. Many speak on joint USG contractor UFO Legacy Programs, but a cornerstone of my work has been discussing the missing intermediary, federally funded research and development centers, FFRDCs, and university-affiliated research centers, UARCs. I will not bore returning viewers of these details, but I often speak on how these semi-private government-controlled RDT&E centers act as liaison between USG/DoD and US defense contractors for UFO reverse engineering and material exploitation programs. Such institutions would serve as subject matter experts and provide necessary R&D work on project materials. This would in turn keep knowledge access in TUO programs quite strict, only allowing contractor personnel with a need to know full insights into the full extent of the non-human materials on which the programs focus. The Navy employs numerous UARCs and FFRDCs, often entwined with unacknowledged special access programs, and controlled access programs. Such UARCs include the Applied Physics Laboratories at Johns Hopkins University and the University of Washington, as well as the Applied Research Laboratories at the Universities of Hawaii at Manoa, University of Texas at Austin, and Pennsylvania State University. Penn State's UARC was established in 1945 by Penn State President Dr. Eric A. Walker. Dr. Walker was named by physicist and consultant to the DoD Research Board Dr. Robert Sarbacher as participating in 1950s UFO retrieval and reverse engineering programs alongside Dr. Vannevar Bush. Walker would be contacted by various UFO researchers in the 1980s and make some startling revelations. not only admitting he himself was present at the 1965 Kecksburg, Pennsylvania UFO crash, but also claiming he knew of the Majestic 12, and to engage in UFO legacy programs, one would need to know about ESP, extrasensory perception. It is interesting how a former TRW board member and founder of Penn State's UARC would essentially confess he was part of a UFO legacy program. And by the way, as recently as 2013, the Office of Naval Research has displayed a keen interest in studying ESP. The ONR would even publish a quote, revolutionary program looking into sixth sense among humans to train personnel on intuitive decision-making, end quote. Additionally, according to the testimony of Randy Anderson, the Navy, specifically the Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane and contractor SAIC, has engaged in recovered technologies that respond to human consciousness at the Underground Off-World Technologies Division. The Navy also engages in a tremendous roster of programs with FFRDCs well worth our interest, primarily the Center for Naval Analyses run by the CNA Corporation based out of Crystal City, Arlington, Virginia. Returning viewers will recall how I recently implicated Crystal City and a likely massive underground facility beneath a neighborhood and Pentagon as a major center for UFO legacy programs SAPs and USAPs. Many of the acronyms Sharp listed in his work regarding undersea retrievals need much further analysis. And as we move forward in this investigation, it is paramount to recognize the Navy has indeed participated in at least one acknowledged USO retrieval operation. Recall the 1962 Bluegill Triple Prime detonation and subsequent UFO recovery discussed by late presidential advisor Harold Malmgren. This event took place during Operation Fishbowl, a series of high-altitude nuclear tests. The Bluegill Triple Prime nuclear test accidentally disabled a nearby UFO that went careening into the waters below. The downed craft or quote-unquote pod was searched for and recovered by the USS Safeguard. Historical logs from the Safeguard discuss the vessel alongside others such as the USS Engage steaming to the water crash location, searching in a square grid pattern, and employing divers to recover a quote-unquote pod. During net recovery of this pod, the Safeguard actually lost power and the pod was released for helicopter pickup. This is a massively consequential case I would like to explore in more detail later on, but let's continue with this investigation. I would be willing to wager most watching this channel have heard of the National Reconnaissance Office or NRO. The NRO is considered alongside the CIA, NSA, DIA, and NGA to be one of the Big Five U.S. intelligence agencies. This agency within the US DoD has historically designed, built, launched, and operated reconnaissance satellites providing signals intelligence to the NSA, imagery intelligence to the NGA, and measurement and signature intelligence to the DIA. David Grush worked for both the NRO and NGA, where he additionally served as the intelligence agency's liaison to the UAP task force. Since 2023, the NRO has had a provable program that tracks UAP, Project Sentient, uncovered in FOIA documents. Sentient serves as a, quote, ongoing research and development program, end quote, that analyzes satellite data with AI capabilities. The program was also tasked with analyzing UAP data, such as a 6 May 2021 incident where a small tic-tac object was detected. The Sentient report states this tic-tac to be similar to other objects observed in redacted operating areas. In 2021, the NRO contributed to the ODNI's, or Office of the Director of National Intelligence's, report to Congressional Intelligence and Armed Services Committee on progress made by the UAP task force. This discussion of the NRO and UFOs are interesting, seen as they contradict a 2015 statement made by the NRO which states it had no documentation relating to UFOs, and that the topic was, quote, outside of the scope of NRO responsibilities. Furthermore, the NRO has conducted numerous searches in the past and has located no records, end quote. The NRO has of course additionally been implicated in providing assistance for UFO crash retrieval operations. These accusations have been made by Chris Sharp discussed above, and witnesses I've covered on this channel numerous times, including Stephen Greer witness A.H., as well as USAF Master Sergeant Edgar Fouché, who claimed the NRO alongside the NSA and CIA managed the TR-3B reverse-engineered triangular alien reproduction vehicle. A fascinating document allegedly released by the NRO surfaced in 1991. I have covered this document before in relation to Blackjack Control and Blackjack Team, a possible joint reverse engineering group out of Edwards Air Force Base in the Nevada Test and Training Range. This document is again worth our attention because of the countless groups of interest mentioned throughout. These include Magi Ops, Red Flag MOC, Sea Spray SOG, and Aquatech SOG. Allegedly, Stephen Greer gave this memo to Admiral Thomas Wilson from the Wilson-Davis Notes in a 1997 meeting. This meeting did occur, this is not disputed. However, according to Greer, Wilson recognized at least one of the clandestine groups listed in this memorandum for record from the NRO. Though the NRO likely works with the CIA DS&T and Navy for USO retrievals, they are not our focus for Naval Legacy Programs. The NRO was born based on a recommendation to President Eisenhower during a National Security Council meeting. The agency was formed to coordinate the Air Force's and CIA's reconnaissance activities. Lesser known is an additional agency formed to coordinate the CIA's and Navy's reconnaissance activities, the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office. This agency, NURO, is known as the hidden younger brother of the NRO. Implications about this agency and naval USO retrievals are scant, seen as NURO is a classified black agency, but we will do everything we can to investigate. NURO itself has been widely considered to be a special access program, according to publications made by the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, quote, "Most SAPs involve technology projects. At the Department of Defense, there are relatively few SAPs involving sensitive human intelligence collection or exploitation methods. Examples of ongoing non-technology SAPs include interrogation protocols for high-level battlefield detainees in Afghanistan managed by the Defense Counterintelligence and Human Center of the DIA, and every single capability of all special mission units of the Joint Special Operations Command. One entire government agency, the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office, is protected by a SAP." End quote. From this statement, we can learn NURO is an extremely rare example of an entire intelligence agency being protected via a special access program. But do not be mistaken, NURO is a very real program, and we can find snippets of its very existence here and there, including a drastic revelation we will touch on soon. This includes mention of NURO in a 1975 submission of documents to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Included in a long list of National Security Council intelligence directives is a National Security Decision Memorandum 40, which details both NRO and NURO operations. According to the Historical Dictionary of International Intelligence by Nigel West, NURO began during the Cold War as a joint Navy-CIA group to coordinate and fund special projects conducted by submarines. In his book, The U.S. Intelligence Committee, Jeffrey T. Richelson was able to learn even more about NURO. Quote, "In 1969, as a result of an agreement between the CIA and U.S. Navy, an underwater counterpart to the NRO, the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office, NURO, was established, with Secretary of the Navy John Warner as its first director. The office served as a means of managing the conduct of submarine intelligence missions and exploitation of their product. Those missions involved the recovery of sunken submarines, the Soviet K-129, taping of the underwater Soviet communication cables, the Ivy Bells aka the Deklenson program, ocean floor mapping under a program named Desktop, and imagery and SIGINT collection from submarines, a program at one time designated the Special Navy Control Program." End quote. Author Jeffrey T. Richelson was even denied FOIA requests on NURO. From what we can learn, the agency has deployed several highly specialized ships and submarines, including the USS Parsh, the Hughes Glomar Explorer, the USS Halibut, the NR-1, and more recent, the USS Jimmy Carter. Of particular note is the United States' first nuclear-powered submarine launched 1969, the same year as NURO's founding, and retired in 2008, the NR-1. This sub carried out numerous highly classified missions, including search, object recovery, geological survey, oceanographic research, and installation and maintenance of underwater equipment. One publicly acknowledged NR-1 mission occurred in 1976 with the recovery of an F-14 lost from an aircraft carrier. NURO seemingly performed operations to swarm a stranded Soviet submarine in 1981 in Swedish waters. In response to statements made by former Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger stating NURO submarine operations in Swedish waters were routine defense tests, a senior U.S. official said, quote, I don't know why Weinberger said what he did. Covert submarine operations is the most secret thing we have. The decisions were taken by a subcommittee of DIA and CIA people, most likely the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office, but I will neither confirm nor deny any operation in Swedish waters, end quote. An additional high-ranking CIA officer confirmed with the International Peace Research Institute Oslo that U.S. covert submarine retrieval operations were run in Scandinavian waters by NURO, whilst directed by Secretary of the Navy John Lehman from 1981 to 1987. Analyzing the inception of NURO and the retrieval of the K-129 Soviet submarine as detailed by Jeffrey Richelson, we may gain some keen insights into the organization and their alleged UFO retrieval missions. In Blind Man's Bluff, the untold story of American submarine espionage, NURO was established under CIA Director Richard Helms to address the sinking of the Soviet submarine K-129 outside of Hawaii in 1968. Though the office was intended to act between the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology and Office of Naval Intelligence, quote, from the day NURO was formed, the CIA took charge, end quote. NURO has seemingly seen a tug of war of control through the CIA and Navy, but by 1972 the Navy regained some control of NURO, seeing Secretary of the Navy John Warner serve as its director. However, through NURO, the Navy and CIA DS&T's usage of the Glomar Explorer may be worth analyzing more. To address K-129, the CIA built the ship the Glomar Explorer mentioned above, which launched in 1972 to recover the sub under Project Jennifer, aka Project Azorian. Astoundingly, the ship carried a modern-day price tag of $1.68 billion. I would like to thank Medium author Underscored for this great piece titled General Motors, Glomar Explorer, Lockheed Martin, and UAP Connections. His article will be in the video description. The piece explores the Glomar Explorer being involved in hidden programs beyond the scope of K-129 Soviet submarine recovery in 1974 and was additionally used for nearly 2 decades by Lockheed Martin. Since the ship was a NURO creation, we can reasonably assume these clandestine operations and Lockheed Martin's usage were conducted under NURO. The article discussed how in 1978, Ocean Minerals Company, whose prime contractor was Lockheed Missiles and Space Company, now Lockheed Martin, leased the Glomar Explorer for quote-unquote deep sea mining operation. The question must be asked, did Lockheed, NURO, and the Glomar additionally partake in these undersea UFO retrievals? After all, later in this project, we will address a scintillating 1970s UFO crash retrieval case in which the Glomar Explorer allegedly retrieved a downed non-human craft. We will also discuss an incredible 1991 USO recovery in this project, and touch on how I believe NURO provided transportation and logistics assets to the Navy's Project Sand Dollar, a clandestine, highly compartmentalized project that was tasked to retrieve military-sensitive hardware and other items with national security importance from the seafloor of the continental shelf and deepest marine environments. Sand Dollar seemingly gained actionable leverage when in 1964 Chief Scientist of the Special Projects Office of the U.S. Navy, Dr. John Pena Craven, launched the Deep Submergence Systems Project, which saw the Navy drastically improve deep-sea engineering and exploitation capabilities, but much more on this later. The most astonishing discussion of NURO actually comes from a man mentioned dozens of times on this channel who self-admittedly served as its director.
Thank you. I became the Director of Naval Intelligence 13 September 1974, brand new flag selectee that year. I also had a second hat, and they still don't want me to talk about it even now, of Director of the National Underwater Reconnaissance Office. Sitting highly classified, that's the organization that built all of the sensitive reconnaissance systems to collect intelligence under the surface of the oceans.
Bobby Ray Inman allows us an extremely rare opportunity to understand naval UFO/USO legacy programs as well as the likely involvement of NURO. Inman served as a highly decorated 4-star admiral in the U.S. Navy from 1951 to 1982, while also serving as the NSA and CIA director and director of SAIC and Wackenhut. Of course, if you are unfamiliar with these two companies, SAIC is a premier contractor I have discussed and will discuss later in this video as being heavily involved with UFO Legacy Programs. SAIC was likely the contractor described by former U.S. Army Green Beret Randy Anderson as running the Off-World Technologies Division below the Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane. Wackenhut was a contracted security company I have covered before that has oftentimes been implicated as providing industrial security forces who have guarded UFO-related SAP locations. And of course, Inman's dual roles within U.S. intelligence and the Navy also suits an organization like NURO perfectly. Anyways, Inman states in the above clip he took a hold of the highly secretive NURO in 1974. Inman had only spoken publicly about NURO once before in an October 2021 interview with David Zerler, the director of the Caltech Heritage Project. At this time, Inman served on Caltech's Board of Trustees, to which he had been appointed in 1989 on the behalf of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, NASA, and Congress. While discussing JPL's future as a productive national asset working alongside NASA, Inman was reminded of his Navy and NSA days during his tenure in the National Underwater Reconnaissance Program. According to Inman, NURO served as a black program due to its constant need to pursue evolving, cutting-edge technological capabilities to outsmart adversaries. Later on in the interview, Inman touched on his role as Director of Naval Intelligence and Director of NURO, whose very existence was still classified. In Inman's own words, he was harassed for even mentioning the office. Quote, "In recent years, when I talked about it, I got a pretty hot letter telling me I was not permitted to talk in detail since they were all still classified," end quote. According to Inman, NURO was in essence a black program that, quote, "acquired the technology for undersea reconnaissance, ranging from conducting imagery of the ocean floors looking for anything which might be desirable from an intelligence point of view. Before my time, it had been engaged in the efforts to pick up a submarine off the ocean floor with the Glomar Explorer. By the time I took over, it was primarily designed to track the hardware to be used in modern collection activities. The actual missions were conducted by the services, by the U.S. Navy, by the Submarine Force, by the National Security Agency. I had already been exposed to the Glomar Explorer program when I was in Hawaii as the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence," end quote. So from Inman, the U.S. Intelligence Committee, and Blind Man's Bluff, we can learn the director of NURO dealt with technology acquisition and was also a high-ranking naval official ranging from Secretary of the Navy to Director of Naval Intelligence. Also recall how Inman states he was exposed to NURO's Glomar Explorer in Hawaii. In 1974, the K-129 Soviet wreckage was picked up 1,560 miles northwest of Hawaii, however. Once again later in this project, I will bring up an alleged UFO recovery in 1973, conducted by the Glomar in Hawaii. Could Inman possibly have been involved in this retrieval in an official capacity? But why exactly are these words from Admiral and former NURO Director Bobby Ray Inman so important? I have spoken on this topic quite a few times, but as this directly involves U.S. Navy UFO Legacy Programs, let's dive back in. In 2022, on the Project Unity show, Inman claimed he had found quote-unquote plausible explanations for all UAP sightings.
In my years active service, I became intrigued by the whole issue of UFOs. And as I dug into it, I found there were plausible explanations for virtually everything that we have observed.
Until recently, with the openness of Admiral Timothy Gallaudet, naval officials quite often denied the existence of UFO. This dates all the way back to 1951, where the Office of Naval Research physicist Erner Liddell stated in a public magazine article that all UAP reports were mirages or balloons. He stated trained observers were being fooled. These 2022 statements by Inman contradict much of this man's storied history.
I started out extremely skeptical about this whole thing. I thought this was just rubbish from the tabloids, but I was surprised to find thousands of U.S. government documents from intelligence agencies that tended to indicate that there was a little bit more to this than met the eye. So I went to seek guidance from the various highest levels of the United States intelligence community, and I was quite alarmed at what I was able to learn.
Now we are, in this report that we're now going to show, we're going to hear a conversation featuring you. Tell me the context of that conversation.
Well, I had contacted Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who was the head of the National Security Agency in the United States, Deputy Director at CIA, Director of Naval Intelligence, and a variety of intelligence posts, a technologist, and clearly someone that if this was really accurate, that there really were UFOs and non-human intelligence around, this is a man who had to know. So I was able to contact him thanks to a contact through Admiral Lord Hill Norton here in the UK. And this conversation, he alarmingly not only indicated that these issues were covered under national secrecy laws, but that the United States government did in fact have possession of the hardware associated with this. In other words, this was an actual physical phenomenon. As
A craft, a spaceship.
Several of them, and they were in operational condition, which I assume suggested that they had been in contact, that they had been given these craft for some reason or another, because they certainly weren't crashed vehicles.
In a 1989 telephone call, Admiral Bobby Ray Inman would tell NASA mission specialist Bob Eschler, deputy director of the CIA DS&T, Everett Hindman, would be the best person to ask if recovered vehicles would be available for technological research outside of military circles. To quote Inman in this call, quote, "The Deputy Director for Science and Technology at CIA is named Everett Hindman. He is in fact getting ready to retire in the very near future. That may make him somewhat more willing to have dialogues than he otherwise would have had. When I knew him in that period 7 to 10 years ago, he was a person of very substantial integrity and just good common sense. So as a place to start, he would clearly be high on the list," end quote. And we actually have recorded snippets of this phone call between Eschler and Inman.
Do you anticipate that any of the recovered vehicles would ever become available for technological research outside of the military circles?
10 years ago, the answer would have been no.
Yeah.
Whether as time has evolved, they're beginning to become more open on it, is a possibility.
Eschler would go on to receive this call from Admiral Inman.
Mr. Eschler, this is Tom King in Admiral Inman's office. Yes, you would be breaching confidence and/or violation of the secrecy laws in discussing his involvement in any matter.
Interesting how Inman, a former NURO director, would refer Eschler to a CIA DS&T director for recovered anomalous vehicles. CIA DS&T was of course one half of the founding agencies behind NURO. To note, while Hindman served as CIA DS&T Deputy Director from 1979 to 1982, he would go on to direct Program B in the National Reconnaissance Program from 1982 to 1989. Possibly, this is where a NURO director and NRO program director first encountered UFO Legacy Programs together. Hindman and Eschler arranged to meet at the CIA's headquarters in Langley, Virginia, 10 August 1989. In this meeting, Hindman would deny any knowledge of UFO or UFO Legacy Programs. However, in 2022, Twitter user RGH_UFOs would contact Hindman regarding comments made by Inman that Hindman was knowledgeable on US UFO programs. In this instance, Hindman did not deny, but instead said, quote, "I am a long way and quite a few years from working in the area you are researching," end quote. Hindman would offer to answer any questions relating to UFOs but never responded to RGH, and as of this time, I have additionally attempted to contact Hindman to no response. RGH's inquiries into UFO programs revolved around Hindman's time in the NRO's Program B. As we just mentioned above, Program B served as the CIA's initiative to build and operate satellites for SIGINT purposes. Hindman was the first chief of the facility for the ground element of the program in Pine Gap, Australia. It is fascinating to think Hindman could have been working on UFO Legacy Programs in the 1980s out of the illustrious and infamous Pine Gap for a joint CIA and NRO program. More pertinent to our investigation today, Inman would additionally connect Eschler with another former director of naval intelligence, Sumner Shapiro. It is unknown if, like Inman, Shapiro served on the NURO. In 1989, Eschler met Shapiro under the pretense he was interested in working with the group that managed UFO information, and at this time, Shapiro was retired as Director of Naval Intelligence and served as an executive with BDM International. BDM is of course a former defense contractor purchased by Northrop Grumman directly accused of being involved with UFO Legacy Programs. Shapiro told Eschler factions within the US possess extraterrestrial vehicles that he, Shapiro, had even studied at close quarters. According to the former DNI, teams would take the craft apart, pack them up and ship them around the country to different laboratories. These craft featured unique interlocking components that had to be disassembled in an exact sequence to be put back together. However, Shapiro was incredibly careful with what information he divulged to Eschler, never specifying where vehicles and technology were taken to protect classified information. Eschler would meet Shapiro for a second time in the Admiral's Virginia home in 1990. This visit was far less actionable and concluded abruptly. According to Bob Eschler, as relayed by author Timothy Good, quote,
"To put this into perspective, it was evident that Shapiro had not consulted with Inman regarding the specifics of my research prior to our meeting. In order to draw a link between the technology and its non-human source as one might ordinarily pass a business card, I displayed a small hologram of laser artwork depicting the head of an alien creature. Shapiro became visibly upset, pacing about his living room and expressing concerns about his failure to reach Inman for confirmation of the recommended meeting. And he wondered aloud why Inman had not directed me to the current director of naval intelligence. He decided to terminate the meeting at that point, suspecting that I was there under false pretenses," end quote.
But before we move on from discussing Eschler and insights he gained from senior naval officials, Eschler would also claim Navy EMP experiments were utilized out of Pensacola Naval Air Station to down UFOs for retrievals. These involved Empress and Empress II onboard EMP generators. Inman and Shapiro are not the only naval officials who have spoken on UFO legacy programs. In 2021, now deceased former Navy Director of Science and Technology Development Nat Kobitz told Ross Coulthart he was, during his service, read into a Navy UFO crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. Although Kobitz didn't actively engage with TUO or technologies of unknown origin, he was read into an active program that had retrieved multiple UAP.
He called me on an open line out of the blue, and I could barely believe who he was. His name was Nat Kobitz. He was the US Navy's former longtime Director of Science and Technology Development, their chief R&D scientist, their chief geek for many years, for over 30 years. And sadly, when I caught up with him, he was dying from cancer. And fate dictated that I caught him at the perfect time. And over several months, he finally opened up to me about what he was, on his own admission, read into. He was briefed on the program. And he told me that he had been read into a classified program involving retrieved non-human technology, recovered alien spacecraft. He eventually admitted that he was officially briefed that America had retrieved multiple non-human craft, and that he was aware there was a secret operation underway for decades, in his words, to undertake to reverse engineer them. He admitted that most of what he knew was effectively hearsay, although from some excellent official sources. This is something he'd been briefed into in his official capacity. He did admit that on one occasion he was flown to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, literally taken deep underground, taken to a secure room and shown what looked like some kind of bulkhead from a craft which he believed was constructed in a way that defied conventional explanation. The craft's skin and inner bulkhead were composites bonded at an atomic level. He suspected it was non-human intelligence technology. But being the scientist he was, infuriatingly, he wouldn't say to me it was alien tech. He would just say it was something he had never seen that any human could make. Nat was a patriot. He was a decent, honourable public servant. He respected the fact that this program was being kept secret for a reason, but as a scientist, he also recognised that the American public, and especially Congress, had the right to know what was being done with taxpayer dollars. And he frankly told me that as far as he knew, there was no good justification for keeping it secret.
Remember all the way back to Chris Sharp's mysterious reporting on USO Legacy Programs involving the CIA DS&T, Navy, NURO, SOCOM, and others. To quote Chris in the third iteration of the article, quote, "It is further understood that the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution has provided deep submergence vehicles to support these retrieval efforts," end quote. Woods Hole, or WHOI, as I will call them here, is, quote, "dedicated to advancing knowledge of the ocean and its connection with the Earth systems through a sustained commitment to excellence in science, engineering, and education, and to the application of this knowledge to problems facing society," end quote. The nonprofit research and higher education facility is dedicated to the study of marine science and engineering. During the Cold War, 1985 to be exact, the U.S. Navy deployed a classified mission to investigate the wreckage of the USS Thresher and USS Scorpion, which had sunk in the North Atlantic Ocean at depths of between 10,000 and 15,000 feet. Sounds like a NURO investigation, no? Well, this mission led to the discovery of the wreck of the Titanic. The operational team and vessel that discovered the RMS Titanic was from Woods Hole. WHOI employs a host of highly advanced underwater vehicles that include human-occupied submersibles, remote-controlled vehicles, autonomous and towed robots. These include the AUV Sentry autonomous exploration vehicle capable of exploring depths of nearly 20,000 feet or 6,000 meters, the HOV Alvin, a 3-person research submersible, and the HOV Deep Sea Challenger, used by filmmaker James Cameron. WHOI works closely with U.S. military, specifically the Navy, where it develops technology including ocean battlespace sensors, unmanned undersea vehicles, and acoustic navigation and comm systems. As a matter of fact, going back decades, Woods Hole was involved with the Atomic Energy Commission, the precursor to the Department of Energy that highly likely housed UFO Legacy Programs while also serving as the gatekeepers for UFO data and materials, misclassifying such as transclassified foreign nuclear material. From 1948 to 1949, a gentleman named William Webster served on the Military Liaison Committee for the Atomic Energy Commission. Webster was not only a member of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Corporation, but was also a trustee of the RAND Corporation and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. WHOI even manages the Navy Oceanographic Research Laboratory for the Department of the Navy. This WHOI lab is now part of the Naval Research Laboratory, NRL. However, the National Oceanographic Research Laboratory was formed by a Federal Contract Research Center, or FCRC, the precursor to FFRDC, which I talk about quite often. Present day, Woods Hole also manages projects for the Office of Naval Research, such as Project Sundance. In fact, since 2002, Woods Hole has been awarded over $3.4 billion in federal awards in the form of contracts, subcontracts, and grants. Analyzing such contracts, we can find some data of extreme interest, such as National Defense R&D Services with the Naval Surface Warfare Center, whose crane division I have directly accused runs an underground installation with Science Applications International Corporation, housing the Off-World Technologies Division. Historically, WHOI has been awarded these contracts by NSWC via sole source contracts, a contract method Dr. Eric Davis has spoken of, that are used in UFO legacy programs to maintain compartmentalization and secrecy. Woods Hole is given such sole source indefinite delivery contracts because, quote, "the government believes that the supplier has unique capabilities that cannot be otherwise obtained," end quote. And speaking of SAIC, Woods Hole has also been granted R&D contracts with SAIC and NSWC Crane Weapons Systems Division, JXN. But it doesn't stop there. Woods Hole has been given numerous indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity NSWC contracts to build, fabricate, integrate, evaluate, and support unmanned undersea vehicles, specifically for the Naval Undersea Warfare Center installations. And now we finally get to the most interesting part of this video, a deep sea USO recovery experience that ties together much of what we have discussed on today's episode. This story first appeared on Art Bell's Coast to Coast call-in episode on 19 April 2002, and I plan on using clips of the audio here. However, if people would be interested in fully released audio where I work with a 3D artist to recreate the encounter, please let me know. On this live radio call-in show, Art Bell was contacted by a retired Marine Corps lieutenant colonel. The caller, first name Mark, had been assigned to 22 Area Camp Pendleton to work with the 1st Air Delivery Unit before being stationed at Okinawa, Japan at the Fatima USMC Air Station. It was here he began doing rescue diving work on weekends alongside a Navy crew. Mark would form a friendship with a lieutenant in the Navy who would go on to become a commander of a DSRV, or Deep Submergence Rescue Vehicle Unit.
The friendship I made later came back that I was assigned or requested to join this DSRV unit and did, and was reassigned to Virginia. And basically what we did was deep sea rescue and recovery. If we had a downed aircraft, we would go and try to rig the craft to get it back. Any anomaly that we wanted to look at, basically we were sent. There were several teams that did the same thing we did.
How deep did you go?
We could go 2 miles, excess 2 miles. You're pretty much pushing it. This particular incident I wanted to tell you about, we're about a mile.
So you're saying you could go over 10,000 feet?
Yes.
Wow. All right, anyway, go ahead.
Well, so the particular incident we were involved in, we were just under a mile and a half of water, North Atlantic.
The specific mention of DSRV is critical to this entire investigation. The United States created 2 deep submergence rescue vehicles that operated within the U.S. Navy from 1970 to 2008. Mystic DSRV-1 and Avalon DSRV-2 were products of the Lockheed Missile and Space Company in Sunnyvale, California. DSRVs are to this day some of the most technologically advanced submersibles in the entire world. These 2 vehicles were capable of deploying anywhere in the world, transported within a truck, C-5 Galaxy, or naval vessel to piggyback efficient routes to rescue crews of stranded submarines within 72 hours. These highly advanced submersibles employed a guidance system more complex than Apollo 11's, allowing the DSRVs to hover in place in strong ocean currents to mate with disabled submarines. The Navy conducted numerous exercises with DSRVs 1 and 2, but no official rescues were ever conducted. And this is due to no American subs sinking since 1971. In 1972 saw the introduction of DSRVs 1 and 2. It is interesting to note, DSRV was born from 1964's Deep Submergence Systems Project, DSSP, to increase and develop the Navy's deep ocean engineering capabilities. The project was initially founded out of the Navy Special Program Office, and DSRV's launch date of 70/71 dovetails closely with the beginning of NURO in 1969. Interesting how the DSSP was also founded partly out of the loss of the USS Thresher, the same sub Woods Hole was attempting to find when it discovered the Titanic. If this story is true, this means DSRV, Mystic, and Avalon's practice missions were really to retrieve underwater aircraft and vehicles. And this is most likely fact, as Dr. John Pena Craven, Chief Scientist of the Special Programs Office of the Navy and first head of the DSSP, wrote regarding DSRV and classified operations, quote,
"There were many highly classified missions associated with national security that cannot be accomplished without a DSRV system. The specific operational needs of these missions could not be anticipated, but they were certain to occur. Thus, a DSRV designed, constructed, and deployed for every conceivable rescue mission would also be available for the intelligence quote-unquote mission impossible that were sure to occur," end quote.
Craven's words here are particularly interesting. In 1964, Craven was tasked with spearheading the Deep Submergence Systems Project, which led to the creation of the DSRV and other deep clandestine subs like the NR-1 to respond to unprecedented events at dramatically extended operational depths. In 1965, Craven was given a high-level intelligence briefing by a naval intelligence officer and was informed on the existence of an extremely sensitive program named Sand Dollar. From Craven's book, The Silent War, The Cold War Battle Beneath the Sea, we get a rare chance to learn more about this program. Sand Dollar was tasked to retrieve militarily sensitive hardware and other items with national security importance from the seafloor of the continental shelf in deep marine environment. According to the Silent War, Sand Dollar was buried within the structure of yet another secret program, itself hidden within the Polaris subprogram. This hierarchy and compartmentalization of programs is something we have observed extensively in the Wilson Davis notes and throughout our investigation today. Craven even wrote the program is still classified to this day, that being 2002. Quote, "I was shown an inventory itemizing the items to be known on the seabed and a map of their distribution throughout the world," end quote. To expand on this statement, quote,
"The salvageable items of interest were spread around the globe. There were plenty of interesting objects on ocean floors worldwide, not just in the Bermuda Triangle, and there was an equal distribution of these objects between those that were lying on the continental shelf and those in deep oceans. There was a skew in favor of the continental shelf because of the shallow water, rocks, and shoals, but much of that hardware had either been salvaged or scattered by storms," end quote.
Craven would even discuss 2 vessels previously mentioned to have been used in operational capacity by the NURO, the Halibut and Seawolf. Craven claimed there was no need for maximum security for these submarines because they themselves, quote, "they only transported top secret equipment and teams of industry specialists who would carry out unknown missions in unknown parts of the sea. The performers and the performances were invisible," end quote. As we explore this undersea recovery with DSRV units, we can now study the case with a strong thesis in mind. Chief Scientist John Craven was tasked by the U.S. Navy to drastically increase naval deep-sea diving and engineering capabilities to retrieve undersea objects discovered by an astoundingly compartmented program called Sand Dollar. Craven's 1964 Deep Submergence Systems Project would lead to the creation of clandestine submersibles that were capable of retrieving quote-unquote items of interest from the sea floor. Some of these submersibles, such as the DSRV units, would be shuttled via motherships, including NURO's Halibut and Seawolf. So now the question must be asked, was Sand Dollar the Navy's first UFO Legacy Program designated with the discovery, monitoring, and retrieval of UFOs? After all, Craven would state, quote, "Could I organize and manage a program to carry out this mission using the assets of the DSSP? Furthermore, could I carry it out in such a manner that my family and friends and closest professional colleagues would have no idea that I was involved in such a project?" End quote. From the DSSP, the Navy planned to build 6 DSRV units and additional DSRVs known as Deep Submergence Search Vehicles, DSSVs, that were never officially built outside of Mystic and Avalon. These DSSV DSRVs were intended for seafloor exploration and recovery, and to be capable of clandestine operations with an operational depth of 20,000 feet. So while we dive into Mark's story, I do think it is possible he and his Navy unit were assigned to a DSSV, not the 2 acknowledged Mystic and Avalon DSRVs. If this is the case, no such vessel in which Mark was operating was ever publicly acknowledged to have been built. But back to the story. Our story takes place in the early summer of 1991 at a depth of roughly 1.5 miles in the North Atlantic, 250 nautical miles or roughly 288 standard miles outside of Aberdeen, Scotland. Looking at 250 nautical mile radius outside of Aberdeen compared with the Atlantic Ocean depths, we can draw a reasonable estimate of where this retrieval incident would have taken place. Let us also account for some error in Mark's estimate and give a generous plus or minus 20% room for error in radius here. Therefore, our radius could be up to 50 nautical miles larger, so we have a standard radius of 345 standard miles. And folks using the superior metric system here, I am sorry guys. Waters in the Atlantic near the UK are actually quite shallow, however. 345 miles almost due west of Aberdeen sees depths reaching over 8,000 feet, which is over our 1.5-mile claim. This area of ocean is known as the Rockall Trough, east of the Rockall Plateau. Hopefully further data can come from this very specific location at which this retrieval is alleged to have occurred. Mark's DSRV crew had been sent from Virginia, and as we know from a 2011 Nuclear Regulatory Commission emails detailing the tsunamis in Japan, both the east and west coast of the United States had employed a, quote, very operational ready deep submergence rescue vehicle, end quote. On the DSRV, Mark served to operate computer equipment on the optical and electronic recognition side and also worked on mechanical aspects of the vessel with mechanical arms and rigging for object retrieval. Mark's team was dispatched after a survey vessel in the North Atlantic had picked up a radioactive signature on the sea floor. A second vessel equipped with a side scan determined a vessel to be resting on the seafloor. Naval authorities thought this to be a crashed foreign nuclear submarine. However, the radar signature had shown the object to be smaller than any known nuclear sub. Upon diving, Mark's DSRV attempted to contact the vessel and immediately realized this was not a sub, but shaped more like an aircraft.
And what they did was send a vessel around with a side scan, picked up that there was a vessel on the bottom. They thought first possibly a submarine that had some kind of problem there, not ours, obviously.
Yes, sir.
We would have been in communication. The vessel came back. It was much too small. be any sub that they were familiar with. And at that time, we came on site.
But you were getting some kind of nuclear signature from it.
Right, there's residual radiation from it. And the concern was it a weapon, some type of concealed weapon source, or was it actually a power source?
Right.
And we were brought out from Virginia, steamed out, and not to give you specific minutes, seconds, location, just approximately 250 miles out of Aberdeen, Scotland is where we were. You can draw a circle and narrow it down pretty quick. At that depth, you can limit the waters.
Yes, sir.
But upon diving, we went down, like I say, just under a mile and a half, and we contacted the vessel, which we immediately recognized not as a submarine, but more of an aircraft. Communications back to the top, we were told to go observe, photograph, determine what we have. We thought at that point we had possibly a Russian or Korean aircraft with some type of contained weapon source. So as we went in...
Yeah, that would be logical.
We went in and this particular vessel was partially in the mud, submerged or buried under some mud, had been there for some period of time.
And what were you seeing of it? What shape?
What we saw was I would say the rear two-thirds. It was a triangular shape. It was wedged more.
Triangular
shape. And best way I could describe it, it would be nosed in with about two-thirds exposed to the back.
Yes, sir.
And as you come out the triangular shape, at the back it was rounded as it came to the corner, what would be the corner of the triangle. They were rounded on both sides and had flat across.
Oh, really?
And this
obviously not a conventional aircraft.
Well, one comment was made in the DSRV to the lieutenant commander, who's also a good friend, was my comment was, I don't believe it's Russian. And his comment was, if it is, it's not Russia right now, joking. And the best way I can describe it, it was a charcoal gray in color. It had some markings on the side.
Sir, sir, listen, I'm coming to a break at the top of the hour. Can you manage to hold on?
I can, if you'd like, yes.
I would like, yes. Stay right there, all right? You located this craft, which was triangular in shape, and you were seeing the back portion of it.
Right. At this point, we'd come over almost what I would best describe as broadside to the craft. The nose, what I would determine as the nose end, was submerged in mud.
Mark and his crew had no matching craft or pattern to cross-reference this craft. The 60 to 70 foot charcoal gray triangle with smooth edges, no windows, rivets, seams, or bolts, a rounded rear, and hieroglyphic writing along the side did not lead the crew to suspect terrestrial origins. Mark and his lieutenant colonel friend both thought the craft to be extraterrestrial, but did not relay this to the surface out of fear of psych evaluations and to not risk communication interception. The surface LPH vessel ordered the DSRV unit to return with still photography and video of the craft. We do need to quickly address the markings on the side of the craft that Mark relayed.
And there were markings on the side of it, which were in the skin itself.
And how would you describe those markings?
And I've heard this before. People try to say hieroglyphics and all of this. It was not any language or marking which we would typically see, Russian, Arabic, nothing we were trained or had seen previously.
But hieroglyphic like.
Well, I'll say hieroglyphic-like, but more geometric patterns. There weren't large walking individuals with bird heads, and when I think of hieroglyphics, I think of individuals with a head like a bird or a wolf, and then human body. This didn't have those type of patterns. It was more geometric shapes, but you could tell some of the actual characters repeated. Quite a bit of it was in mud, and then there would be gaps were out of mud, but you could see some repeating of the character.
I have covered in great detail the high-confidence 1965 Kecksburg, Pennsylvania crash retrieval in which numerous town residents observed U.S. military forces retrieve and transport a 12-foot acorn-like bronze craft. Many such witnesses described hieroglyphic-style writing around the circumference of the lower lip of the craft, and additionally, Danny Sheehan has stated in the classified Project Blue Book files, he has seen images of a crashed UFO saucer that displayed geometric hieroglyphic-style characters along its circumference. This is a fascinating detail and connection to these other cases. After 12 hours of waiting after returning to the surface, the DSRV crew was ordered to dive again, this time taking a marine archaeologist. The archaeologist made sketches of the craft and even traveled down with his own personal computer.
Where did this go from there? I mean, now you've got this thing ID'd. Were you suddenly out of the picture, or?
We're in the picture up to the point where we're rigging and recovering. As I said, we took down a marine archaeologist. And one thing that was very interesting, that this individual, we actually monitored currents, did some things, temperatures and such at the site. He was making quite a bit of notes and, really not making a lot of comment, but he did make the comment when we asked, is this recent? Because there was no disturbed area around it, best way to describe it. It looked like it had been in place. And he said that it wasn't any more recent than at least 30 to 40 years, which really threw us back because this thing looked like something beyond, where we're at development-wise aircraft. And I still hadn't ruled out that it was not experimental aircraft at this point, someone's. But the point that he made that the buildup of the silt mud in the front end would appear that this has probably been in place for a period of 30 years or somewhere in the range 30 to 40 years.
And you have, was there an attempt made at recovery?
There was a recovery made, not an attempt made. There was a recovery made of the craft.
What do you know about that?
On the third day of the operation, the DSRV crew dove for a fourth time, this time to retrieve the craft. The team first used thrusters to remove silt and mud from the craft's midsection, so Mark and others could attach equipment to try and lift the vehicle. Immediate problems arose as this crashed USO did not fall under the same procedures and weight estimations used for conventional aircraft. Due to this, the DSRV crew had to make size and base weight estimations. The craft's weight estimations was based on the closest size conventional aircraft, the F-14.
We had thrusted away a lot of the silt and mud from the vehicle. Still had a section, probably about 8 foot, that was trapped or under a depth. It was more of an angle to it. So when we rigged it to bring it up rear first, use the best language I can, we were going to try to lift the rear end up and bring this thing up on an angle and try to keep everything intact and go.
Yes, sir.
We're rigging at with our calculation for the rigging, the weights, brought it up, and it went probably about 2.5 to 3 times the ascent as what we anticipated, which immediately gave us a feel that we're dealing with something extremely light.
Trailing the craft as it ascended, the DSRV crew noticed the underside of the craft was completely smooth. No piping, exhaust, or mechanical features existed on the underbelly of the triangle. When the vehicle was recovered, Mark got a clear look at the craft. It proved to be 6 to 8 feet longer than an F-14 at 62 feet, meaning this craft was 68 to 70 feet long. Mark stated nothing like that existed in 1991, and as of the show in 2002, still nothing like that existed. The craft was a solid metal form with no cockpit and no windows.
Right, it was a little bit, actually a little bit longer. Than the aircraft will be, probably 6 to 8 feet, I would say, in excess of what you would anticipate for F-14.
Well, Colonel, a straight-out question is, do you believe that you recovered an alien craft?
I've never, I've had conversations with the individual, my friend that actually was there. We're still in contact quite often. I can't definitively say that it was. I can only say that it was an object that didn't belong there, and certainly would not have belonged there 30 or 40 years prior to when we were on site. And no visible means of, if you anticipate it was an aircraft and I saw a cockpit, I would say it was definitely somebody's here that was in development. But technology would not allow you to fly such a craft 30 or 40 years ago.
Within 4 hours, Mark and his entire crew were steamed off-site. Mark received no feedback or debriefing on what the vehicle was, nor did he and his crew receive any threats or warnings not to speak about the incident. However, Mark did state when he joined the DSRV team, he was ordered to sign some pretty lengthy NDAs. As we know from Dr. Craven and DSRV for clandestine usage, this does not come as a shock. Mark would be subject to such intense secrecy regarding his work on the DSRV. Mark stated even if the DSRV retrieved a US vehicle, they were not allowed to discuss. Art Bell got the original sketches of the retrieval by the Naval Lieutenant Colonel, and Mark told Bell he would connect him with the naval officer. I am still trying to chase down this case with the help of some high-profile naval officials. More investigation does need to be done on this case since officially, DSRV's Mystic and Avalon had an operational depth of just over 1 mile, and it would be unusual to employ USMC divers for the time. For this reason, I do think back to the 1964 proposal of 6 DSRV and DSSV under the Deep Submergence Systems Project, where only DSRVs 1 and 2 were built. Remember back to the words of Dr. John P. Craven, Chief Scientist of the Navy Special Projects Office, who discussed many classified operations were performed by DSRV teams. I do think it possible DSRV units outside of Mystic and Avalon were built with capabilities akin to the DSSV units. 20,000-foot operational depth capacity with a greater capability for seafloor navigation and object retrieval. And it is interesting, of course, to point out the 1964 Deep Submergence Systems Project DSSP, which aimed to increase and develop the Navy's deep ocean engineering capabilities for Project Sand Dollar, which resulted in the creation of DSRV, occurred just 2 years after the October 1962 Bluegill Triple Prime U.S. Navy UFO recovery. Additionally, this case piqued my interest due to the presence of a crashed triangle. So often in my videos, I discuss many triangular sightings being alien reproduction vehicles. Whether this be the TR-3B, XF-131 Super Sentinel, or a long list of prototypes I have wagered to be built in the late 70s into the early 2000s, I believe the US saw heavy clandestine experimentation within USAPs to build triangular-shaped alien reproduction vehicles. But this triangular case harkens my attention back to the alleged Special Operations 1 Majestic 12 manual. In this piece, the Psalm 101, allegedly written in 1952, details are given to extraterrestrial craft types, including triangles, which according to the document were very new and very rare at the time. The DSRV retrieved the triangle allegedly in 1991. The marine archaeologists claim the triangle had been buried for 30 to 40 years, meaning the crash likely occurred between 1951 and 1961. Interesting how this date range coincides with the Majestic 12 Special Operations Manual, claiming new triangular extraterrestrial vehicles were being spotted at the time of the 1954 manual. If these retrieval events are true and the inside sources of Chris Sharp are correct, water-based USO and UFO recoveries are stationed at naval installations and locations of the Office of Naval Research, where they are then utilized in material exploitation programs. Let us review some cases and testimony throughout history of downed craft stored at naval installations. We will reference numerous sources here, including the legendary Leonard Stringfield, whose work I referenced often in my dumb video. Stringfield's crash retrieval status reports 1 through 7 are, in my opinion, the best crash retrieval work done by any investigator. I will also omit stories of China Lake and the testimony of Randy Anderson and the Off-World Technologies Division, as I have covered these stories and installations and experiences in depth in the past. Leonard Stringfield was once contacted by letter in 1978, tipping him off to Durward Buddy Hack, a CPO radar observer who in 1952, while stationed at the Naval Air Station Sunnyvale, California, disappeared out of sight. While serving at the naval installation, Hack, according to his family, accidentally entered a large door of a hangar that was temporarily unguarded. There, he encountered a massive saucer-shaped craft with rows of windows, and when the guards returned, they forced Hack out and threatened him. Stringfield contacted multiple members of Hack's family who confirmed hearing the story, including his mother, who not only confirmed Hack's disappearance, but also the saucer story. Hack's mother would hear him say, quote, "It was certainly no aircraft of ours," end quote. In 1979, 6 February 1979 to be exact, Stringfield received a letter from one Joan Jeffers. Jeffers stated she knew a retired USAF colonel who enlisted in the 40s and retired in the 70s. While stationed at an Air Force radar facility, the colonel would attend weekly commander's calls at the Naval Air Station in New Brunswick, Maine. At one such meeting in 1956, the colonel was shown a film by Major Lester Goldberg that was apparently shot by the USAF. Interesting side note here, one Major Lester Goldberg did in fact serve at the Brunswick Naval Air Station at this time and was the commanding officer of the 654 Aircraft Control and Warning Squadron. The film showed a circular metal silver-colored disc on the ground. The interior of the craft was well lit and featured smooth walls. The film also showed at least 3 bodies lying on tables. The beams were short and they all looked similar in appearance, featuring a sheen or gray color. None of the beings had any external ears or hair. All appeared to be dead. Further sources of Stringfield, like the anonymous Lieutenant Colonel X, would even state the Navy housed biologics, such as in 1975 when Lieutenant Colonel X claimed, quote, "Bodies are now being flown outside of the US to a secret naval installation on an island in the Pacific Ocean," end quote. Now, the US Navy does employ multiple DoD laboratories and MRTFBs, or Major Range and Test Facility bases, in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. These include the Atlantic Undersea Test and Evaluation Center on the Andros Island, Bahamas, and Pacific Missile Range Facility in Hawaii. There is also incredible research I plan to explore in the future, conducted by Dr. Richard Sauter, that similar to deep underground military bases, the US Navy employs deep underwater military bases. And those familiar with my discussion of MRTFB will recall such installations as Dugway Proving Ground, Edwards 412 Test Wing, NAWC China Lake, Fort Huachuca, the Nevada Test and Training Range, and more. Lieutenant Colonel X also brought forward an interesting connection to the Majestic 12 Special Operations Manual, which claims deceased biologics were taken to the Wright-Patterson Blue Room while living entities were taken to the OPNAC BBS-01. Some have guessed OPNAC is similar to OPNAV, which is the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, while BBS is the Bermuda Biological Station, an Atlantic-based installation now called BIOS. In Crash Retrieval Status Reports 3, Case 15B, Stringfield relayed a cat-and-mouse game with witness AF and his brother Pete. This story took place at the Naval Air Base Yuma, Arizona, now called the Marine Corps Air Station Yuma, which is directly near Yuma Proving Ground. If you remember back to my video on DUMBs, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers took a tremendous interest in building underground installations beneath Yuma County, Arizona. This case in question really frustrated Stringfield, quote, "What seemed to be a case of great potential, including the emergence of photographs of a saucer in military custody, became less so with the passing of time. Following a series of alleged interferences, my sources said they feared even greater consequences and backed off into oblivion," end quote. Stringfield reckoned this case to either be a ploy or example of the lengths legacy operations will go to silence informants. Witness Pete, a former U.S. Marine, claimed to have photographed a saucer-like craft at the naval installation in Yuma, Arizona in 1967. Stringfield tried for months to meet Pete and his brother AF and organized to receive the photos by mail. AF even claimed to have sent numerous letters to Stringfield that were likely intercepted. Stringfield would speak to the men on the phone and learn Pete had been approached by some sort of agency to stay quiet. An intriguing case to mention, but a massive dead end for both Leonard Stringfield and us. Our most fruitful case in Stringfield status reports can be found in UFO Crash Retrieval Status Reports 3 under Case A7. This case takes us to the Great Lakes Naval Base in northern Illinois in 1973. While we discuss this case, do keep in mind the Office of Naval Research has a major Chicago department less than 40 miles away from the Great Lakes Naval Station. Our encounter comes from one witness RK, an E4 grade instructor in gunnery school at the Great Lakes Naval Base from March 1973 to September 1974, destined for intelligence school. I myself am aware of RK's true name and am trying to vet this individual. On 14 July 1980, RK came to the House of Stringfield and relayed his encounter. In September 1973, while instructor in gunnery school, RK was assigned to guard the premises of a large Quonset hut at Great Lakes Naval Base with orders not to let anybody within 100 yards. While on duty, RK was approached by a naval officer who handed him a sealed envelope to deliver to the commander in the Quonset hut. Entering the facility, RK observed a strange metallic craft, 30 feet in length and 10 feet in height, resting on a wooden platform. According to RK, quote, "It was light silvery blue and shimmering. It tapered like a teardrop with a flange running along its topside from one end to the other, and there were no windows," end quote. RK could not linger in the hut due to the presence of other guards. Thus, he delivered the envelope and returned to his post. RK's encounter bore striking resemblance to the testimony of a sailor he had met in San Diego just weeks prior whilst on special assignment. According to this sailor, a UFO identical to the one RK would observe in the coming weeks at the Great Lakes Naval Station was shot down by the Navy between Hawaii and the mainland in June of 1973. This UFO was picked up via destroyer's radar and came into view, making 3 close passes and 1 direct overflight over the destroyer. According to the sailor, the UFO was shot with a lucky hit and crashed into a 350-foot deep water. The San Diego sailor claimed the object was retrieved by the Glomar Explorer and shipped to Hawaii and sent stateside and finally to Chicago. The sailor even provided RK a sketch that was identical to what he had seen. But just hold on a second here. The claims of the Glomar Explorer retrieving the craft are of significant consequence here. Glomar was run by NURO, a joint naval and CIA DS&T effort. If this story is true, this means the Navy, CIA, and intelligence organizations such as NURO downed a UFO and retrieved it from sea. The craft was then shipped to an ONR location where, due to being guarded on a wooden platform, was likely destined for further transport and study. This incident mirrors perfectly the 2024 claims of Chris Sharp's informants. Other cases of naval bases and the Office of Naval Research possessing both information of crashed disks and the materials themselves are plenty. In 1994, former New Mexico State Rep. J. Andrew Kistner stated sources within White Sands Proving Ground in the Naval Research Lab briefed him on recovered flying disks in 1947. These disks were given to the custody of the Atomic Energy Commission and studied by national laboratories such as Los Alamos, Sandia, Rand, MITRE, etc. This is very similar to my modern-day hypothesis of DOE working alongside FFRDC and UARC to exploit UFO materials. According to Kistner's naval sources, the UFO programs were signed into presidential executive order under Truman in 1948 with the National Security Council serving as program coordinator. With support from the Air Force Systems Command, the Research and Development Board ran by Dr. Vannevar Bush, and the Naval Research Lab. Interesting to note as well, in 2005, USAF veteran Stephen Walker would claim while serving at the Naval Support Facility in Diego Garcia, he was exposed to the Navy conducting sensitive operations outside of a large hangar at the northern end of the airfield. Base personnel were ordered to stay away from this quote-unquote empty hangar. One night while the flight line was evacuated, the base was locked down and personnel were ordered to stay inside, away from windows for the arrival of a classified aircraft. Walker claimed that despite listening for the craft for nearly half an hour, he heard no jet engine, no brakes, no tires hitting the pavement, no idling, or no Air Force sounds. This experience is very interesting when analyzing the claims of Master Sergeant Edgar Fouché, who claimed UFO programs were moved out of Area 51 in the early 90s because of intensive scrutiny from the public on Groom Lake. UFOs, especially the TR-3B reverse engineered triangle programs, were relocated to various installations including Dugway Proving Ground and Diego Garcia. I must now circle back to early discussion of NURO and reference back to U.S. Intelligence Committee and discussion of imagant and SIGINT collection from submarines, a program at one time designated the Special Navy Control Program. Special Navy Control Program is quite similar to something called the Navy Special Program, or NSP. The NSP is a highly elusive naval office that, similar to NURO, we can only find snippets of. The first ever mention I can find of the Navy Special Program is in a 1974 omnibus National Security Council Intelligence Directive alongside the NRO. Remember, the NRO was not declassified until 1992, so this mention of the National Reconnaissance Program, which is the direct funding mechanism for the NRO, is likely to obfuscate the program. But what exactly is this Navy Special Program mentioned alongside the National Reconnaissance Program, especially in the context of this NSCID not wanting to bring undue attention to both of these programs? Now, since NURO was created between the Navy and CIA DS&T, you may think Navy Special Program refers to NURO. However, the Navy Special Program is itself a very real office. Indeed, the Navy Special Program Office serves as an umbrella control system for several naval clandestine undersea operations. However, in this context and due to the extreme secrecy of NURO to this day, as highlighted by Inman, NURO could have certainly been rolled under the NSP. To further this thesis, we can look back to an 11 December 1975 declassified memo for the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence and others. Here we get a keen look at the organizational structure of the Navy Special Program. The Navy Special Program was once designated to run parallel to the National Reconnaissance Program, or NRO, under the Executive Committee for the Director of Central Intelligence and the Assistant Secretary for Defense for Intelligence. Someone really ought to ask Christopher Mellon about the Navy Special Program, seeing as he himself served as former ASD/I. The NSP, according to this memorandum, serves to act for intelligence collection, similar to the NRO, DIA, or CIA. Having previously detailed the duties of NURO, I do think this description means NURO is likely hidden within the NSP here, especially given the time frame 1975, where throughout our investigation we see NURO's activities really ramping up from its creation in 1969 throughout the 70s. Therefore, with the Navy Special Program acting as an umbrella office for numerous Navy clandestine operations, including possibly housing NURO, it is no stretch to theorize a program that conducts undersea retrievals of anomalous craft alongside NURO that sends such vehicles to the Office of Naval Research locations, to then be studied by federal elements and defense contractors, would be hidden within the NSP. These operations would be compartmented and rolled under the Navy Special Program Office. This process for naval UFO legacy programs would likely remain the same today. After all, as of 26 May 2023, we can find requests for approval for Special Access Program facilities by the Navy Special Program Central Office. Naval legacy programs hidden within the NSP for extensive classification and compartmentalization carries sound logic, especially when factoring in statements of former Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet. Admiral Gallaudet has spoken on congressional record that whilst he is aware of testimony of naval UFO legacy programs, he did not directly encounter them or was not briefed during his prestigious position within the Navy. We can find one intriguing acknowledged CIA program that likely utilized the Navy Special Program, Project Palladium, and its director Samuel Gene Poteet. Poteet served at the NRO, CIA DS&T, as well as served as the technical director of the Navy Special Program Office, where he provided naval reconnaissance systems expertise for the CIA Directorate of Science and Technology. Poteet was a senior Central Intelligence Agency scientific intelligence officer, inventor, teacher, and association executive. He, quote, provided scientific expertise on space and naval reconnaissance systems in the Directorate of Science and Technology and served at the National Reconnaissance Office as Technical Director of the Navy Special Programs Office and as the Executive Director of the Intelligence Research and Development Council, end quote. Under the CIA, Poteet spearheaded Project Palladium in the 1960s with heavy use of naval assets, ships, and submarines. The project employed a variety of clandestine submarines, radar reflectors, and jamming tactics to trick and gauge Soviet radar capabilities. Essentially, Palladium performed to fill Soviet radar systems with fake UAP signatures. Of course, our true interest here lies with Palladium's usage of clandestine subs and Poteet's connection to the Navy Special Program Office. According to excellent researcher Jeff Cruikshank, references to Project Palladium can be found in the Majestic 12 documents. The terse memo dated 28 June 1961 is a majestic document Ryan and Robert Wood have rated with a moderate to high authenticity. This memo allegedly sees JFK write to the Director of Central Intelligence Allen Dulles in a national security memorandum with the subject, quote, "Review of MJ-12 intelligence operations as they relate to Cold War psychological warfare plans," end quote. It is intriguing to see Allen Dulles did indeed meet with JFK twice, 28 June 1961. Cruikshank argues the psychological warfare plans referenced in the terse memo directly reference Operation Palladium, although Palladium didn't get its iconic name until April 1962 when Dr. Albert Whelan took over as head of CIA DS&T. The description of Palladium would appear again in further Majestic documents, and this is supported in the medium confidence Operation Review the MJ-12 Project, allegedly written by Allen Dulles on 5 November 1961. This document describes how the CIA was mapping the Soviet air defense system by using airborne electronic countermeasure equipment and balloon decoys. Such a purpose was to provide a true picture of how Soviet air defenses perceived UFOs. The memo discussed future similar psychological warfare plans very similar to the terse memo. Details of Project Palladium appearing in early MJ-12 documents dropped to Jamie Chandray in 1984 prove significant, seen as, according to an article by Jean Petit in Stories of Intelligence Research, only 6 people knew about Palladium in the 1960s. Since Palladium was not declassified until long after 1984, this implies whoever wrote these select Majestic documents was well aware or a part of Project Palladium. As a matter of fact, the first time Palladium would be discussed was within a classified manner in a 1998 CIA journal written about by the aforementioned Jean Petit. Historically, the Navy Special Program saw heavy compartmentalization and incredibly strict need-to-know access. In this 29 October 1974 CIA memo titled "Clearances Held by NSIC," or National Security Council Intelligence Committee Working Group members, discussion was held around National Security Council Working Group programs overlapping certain compartmented areas of the Navy Special Program. For read-on access, clearance requests were required for a redacted name and National Security Council member and CIA officer Richard Ober. This NSC memo was sent just a few days after the NRO memo from 1974 we discussed earlier. We can additionally analyze a fascinating 14 December 1984 memo written to U.S. Navy Rear Admiral and Director of Naval Intelligence John Butts. The memo thanks John for his personal sacrifices in arranging meetings in spite of a tooth injury. The writer, from within the staff of the Director of the Intelligence Community, additionally informed Butts they had received a letter from the Secretary of the Navy John Lehman concerning the Navy Special Program. Remember, Lehman additionally served as Director of NURO. This letter apparently took a month to get to the desk of the Director of Central Intelligence. The writer additionally suggested John Butts include a representative from Everett Hindman's department on the Redacted Special Ad Hoc Requirements Committee. Remember, Hindman was labeled by Inman as the CIA DS&T member knowledgeable on UFO legacy operations. The work here on the Navy Special Program is just the beginning for me, and the ties to other subjects we have covered today is extremely interesting. After all, I have found and attempted to contact numerous former Navy Special Program personnel. These include a man who served for 3 years as a diver in the Navy Special Program with the Mobile Diving and Salvage Unit 1. I have also contacted one Mr. P.R. who served for 8 years as project lead for Navy Special Program Office and SOCOM Acquisition Program Office. How interesting this ties into the work of Chris Sharp regarding USO retrievals, the Navy, and SOCOM. Especially intriguing, seeing as Sharp implicated Lockheed Martin Dry Submersible as participating in USO retrieval. And since 2023, SOCOM has declared operational capability with Lockheed Martin Dry Submersible. And finally, I have contacted one Mr. W.H., who served for 2 years as an Office of Naval Intelligence Chief Information Security Officer for the Navy Special Program. And please understand, I am protecting the identity of these individuals as they very well may wish to speak on the NSP. Believe it or not, today we have only scratched the surface of naval UFO legacy programs. In the beginning of this project, I separated naval legacy programs into 4 distinct categories: monitor, collect, store, and exploit. Of course, monitor has been omitted from today's discussion, as has majorly exploit. Has the Navy successfully created Seafaring ARV, a deep sea equivalent to the Fluxliner? This, of course, will be another topic for another day. Today, we've investigated the Navy Special Program Office and Office of Naval Research conducting undersea UFO and USO crash retrievals, alongside SOCOM, private entities such as Lockheed Martin and Woods Hole, and intelligence organizations such as the NRO, NURO, and CIA DS&T. We have also discussed myriad senior naval officials such as Sumner Shaprio, Bobby Ray Inman, and Nat Kobitz, who have all commented on the existence of crash retrieval and material exploitation programs. We have barely begun to dive in and discuss the FFRDC's naval UARCs and DoD RDT&E facilities that are highly likely involved with naval UFO legacy programs. Outside of mention of Lockheed, Woods Hole, and SAIC, we have barely even discussed contractors in UFO legacy operations. Outside of sole source contracts, we have yet to really even dive into how legacy operations within the Navy are funded. I have spoken before on Witness Ed, who claimed the existence of a joint UFO reverse engineering program between Edwards Air Force Base and the Nevada Test and Training Range. After his service at Edwards, Ed would proceed to work at the Pentagon for the Air Force's RDT&E panel chain, where he would claim in 2 separate years $34 and $40 billion disappeared to non-authorized transfer of authority funds. Ed would additionally work as liaison between the Pentagon and various defense contractors as an F-35 program subject matter expert. As a test director for an electronics warfare group dealing with reverse-engineered UFOs out of the Edwards 412 test group, I have theorized Ed's work on the F-35 also dealt with anomalous technologies. This is no stretch, as the F-35 program has historically carried an incredibly bloated budget of $2 trillion. Such bloated budgets with backdoor clandestine UFO programs may have also occurred in the Navy, and we may get a keen look at such an instance. In 1985, the U.S. Navy faced a massive controversy for an incredibly bizarre occurrence. Scandal arose when in '85 it was discovered the U.S. Navy had paid Grumman Aerospace Corporation $660 apiece for ashtrays to be included in the E-2C Hawkeye. The Navy only began to investigate how many of these ashtrays had been bought and why they cost so much when an investigator for the House Government Operations Committee discovered this egregious oversight. From this investigation, it had also been determined the Navy was paying Grumman $400 per socket wrench that were used to adjust the seats of F-14s. And the Navy had also increased payments for ground locks from $102 in 1982 to $2,710 a year later. Shockingly, this investigation would also reveal years prior the Navy had been charging itself $954 for ashtrays. For such infractions, Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, who made some contested statements about NURO above, removed 3 officers prior to any investigation. And Grumman Aircraft whined that piece prices were so high due to needing to make a small number of parts to spec. The damage had been done, leading to House Committee investigators looking into larger naval contracts and discovered, for example, profits on aircraft carrier contracts were in excess of $753 million or 29.7%. And contractor profits on a single Trident 735 submarine were in excess of $96 million or 22%. Where was all this excess money on contracts and parts going? I wager, since we are discussing contractors such as Grumman, which I have directly implicated in UFO legacy programs before its merger with Northrop, these funds were siphoned off legitimate contracts or parts to fund clandestine Deep Sixth UFO crash retrieval and material exploitation programs. So after all of this, today has mostly served as an expose into naval legacy crash retrieval operations and necessary logistics. More and more in my videos, I plan to speak on naval and special USO legacy programs. This is due to multiple sources of mine informing me Navy USO programs are more secretive than even standard UFO legacy operations. Hey guys, it's Gerb, and thank you so very much for sticking through with me while we took this dive into the US Navy and UFO and USO legacy program operations. Now, as I said at the very end of this video, from multiple individuals that have worked in legacy programs to are tangentially aware of them have informed me that the US Navy's programs are the most secretive there are. Why is this? Is it because the Navy deals with weapons technology, as in the Randy Anderson case with the gauntlet and the orb that supposedly experienced energetic discharge during recovery? Or is it because the Navy, specifically the ONR, is a pristine stop for craft? Or is it because the transmedium capabilities of UFO are the most coveted aspect of material exploitation and monitoring? Or is it possibly because some of the secrecy stems from the possibility there are undersea UFO bases, and inherently if this is where some craft are stationed and departing from, this implies much secrecy? And that sort of makes a little sense, as we've seen with NURO. Underwater reconnaissance systems, clandestine submarines, are some of the United States' most highly regarded secrets. We have 5 major intelligence agencies: the CIA, DIA, NSA, what am I missing? NRO and NGA. But NURO's not on there. And we've seen and proven today that NURO does exist. So why is NURO not listed? NURO is really what kicked off my investigation into this subject back in September with the work of Chris Sharp, when he detailed and changed the article about undersea retrievals in the ONR, JSOC, SOCOM, Lockheed Martin, Woods Hole, and NURO. This really kicked off my interest. One of the most intriguing aspects of this project, of course, was Bobby Ray Inman, a regular of this channel, admitting that he was director of NURO. And I'm really glad we got to explore a little bit more into Inman and his interactions with Eschler and Everett or R. Evan Heinemann, as well as Sumner Shapiro. Again, as I stated, I've received no contact back from Heinemann, and I've also tried to contact Shapiro's family. They have not gotten back to me either. I would like to get statements from some other people surrounding this case, but NURO really kicked off this operation. And as we've seen with NURO, as a black program agency, all of its operations have been shrouded in secrecy. Whether this entails usage of the Glomar Explorer, the Halibut, the NR1, the Seawolf, there is so much secrecy surrounding NURO, and that bridges really perfectly into the 1991 retrieval case under witness Mark. Now, as I said in the video too, I'm still vetting this case. I'm working with some individuals to try to identify Mark, to try to identify the Naval Lieutenant Commander, and trying to track down those original sketches. I know Art Bell has passed away, and he was the point of contact for both of these, but I am trying to track that down. So Mark's story involves a DSRV, or as I hypothesized from Craven in the work under the DSSP, a DSSV, Deep Submergence Search Vehicle. I think those depth capabilities and mechanical arms and rigging for retrieval of craft suit a DSSV more than a DSRV, because DSRV was specifically created for transfer of crew from a submarine, where a DSSV was specifically tailored, never built, to retrieve vehicles and to retrieve items. Did this fall under Project Sand Dollar? As we saw with Project Sand Dollar under Craven as well, Sand Dollar involved items of interest on the sea floor. Of particular interest were radioactive or nuclear emitting items. And as we see in Mark's case, the original side scan from vessels and other vessels that picked up the signature of the craft, this was emitting some sort of radiation, to the point where the DSRV crew initially thought this to be a downed Korean or Russian aircraft with some sort of nuclear technology. And it is interesting to see, as Mark said he steamed out of Virginia, that the 2011 Fukushima documents detail that DSRV units were ready and able in the east and west coast of the United States. So let's talk about that incident a bit more, because it's very rare we can ever find an undersea retrieval. The only other example I can think of is Shag Harbor, which occurred in 1967, and I would like to tackle that case in the future, especially because there is testimony of the U.S. Navy kind of coming in, the U.S. Navy divers, and coming in and really taking over the retrieval operation. But Mark's DSRV crew observes a triangle. And as I said in the video, and as we talk about in this channel quite often, I oftentimes attribute human origin to triangular craft, whether this be the TR-3B, the XF-131 Super Sentinel, which I almost put more credence in than the TR-3B, or other prototypes that we discussed throughout the 80s and 90s in the TR-3B video. But this craft featured hieroglyphic-like writing alongside its outer edge, which, similar to Kecksburg and Danny Sheehan's accounts, is not rare, but not common in UFO crash retrieval incidents. The description of this craft is very similar to other NHI craft: no landing gear, no mechanical systems, no cockpit, no glass, no windows, etc. What interests me is the the aftermath of the retrieval, Mark states that after the marine archaeologist and 4 dives were able to observe the craft and they were able to get it off the ground and retrieve it, that after a couple hours, Mark and his crew were steamed off site and were never warned not to speak about this incident, warned not to talk about it, or signed further NDAs. Now, Mark inherently had to sign NDAs and non-disclosure agreements for his work on DSRV, which, as we know from John Payne Craven, were sent almost exclusively on clandestine operations. So it stands to reason there's a heavy amount of secrecy when you sign on for this crew. But it almost appears as if the steamer, the LPH vessel that discovered the craft in the DSRV, was still trying to figure out what the heck they had uncovered, because it took a couple hours for Mark and his crew to be steamed off site, and they were never briefed on the incident, debriefed, or discussed it further. I do hope Mark is still alive, and I would like to speak to him. I very much would. And then what is interesting with NURO, as well as the connection to the 1973 Great Lakes Naval Station case. Of course, Stringfield published on this back in the 80s, so the Glomar Explorer and its work with NURO wasn't very well known, if at all, at this time. The Glomar Explorer had been known for Project Azorian, retrieving 1/3 of the Soviet K-129 submarine, but just the connection of witness J.K. stating that the San Diego sailor that he met that saw basically the same craft he saw had told him that it had been shot down between Hawaii and the mainland by a destroyer and retrieved by the Glomar Explorer. And this was early 1973. And then there's fascinating connections that Bobby Ray Inman stated that in the early 70s, 72 to 74 to be exact, he became aware of the Glomar's activities out in Hawaii. So there's a lot of really connective tissue here with these statements. And I know I say this in most videos, but our work with the Navy is really just beginning here. There are so many more facilities we need to look at, so much more investigation into China Lake. Because the Navy, and if Chris Sharp's reporting is correct, the ONR specifically is almost a staging point for housing craft. Now this makes me wonder, does the Air Force, if they retrieve a craft, or the Army, if they retrieve a craft, do they initially stage at naval locations to then be transported again? Does the Navy just satisfy naval UFO legacy programs for storage of craft, or do they also operate alongside Army and Air Force? This would surprise me, as everything I have been told, investigated, and seen is that Army, Air Force, and Navy almost act siloed. Very different programs, sometimes doing the same thing, but almost no communication to adhere to the compartmentalization of these programs, where only the intelligence community overlords really know what's going on between programs. So that would be really interesting to track down. But anyways, guys, if anybody watching this video has any experiences or connections with individuals who have retrieved undersea craft or know of stories of undersea craft retrieval, please contact me and I would love to speak to you. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. This was a wonderful project for me to pursue, and I really hope everybody enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. If you have any thoughts, comments, things to add, please remember to like and subscribe. I have a Patreon. I don't gatekeep content. That's not what I do. Only support what you think the channel is worth, and I will catch everybody on the next episode. Thank you so much, and see you later.